Okay, so today we're going to dive into something pretty wild. Trump back in the White House. And not just any old comeback. The guy won facing a whole bunch of indictments, even a felony conviction. Like, seriously, this is unheard of, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely unprecedented.
So we got this article folks sent in from Mercator Online Magazine, it's called. Why did Americans vote for the felon? And that's the question we're tackling today.
Right, trying to unpack that whole thing.
Why would America choose a convicted felon for president?
Well, the article makes it's an interesting argument. They say to understand Trump's appeal, we need to look at him like a social bandit.
Social bandit. That sounds more like a...
Like some history book thing, not a 21st century election.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The article brings up Eric Hobsbawm's work. He was a historian who he argued that when people feel the system's rigged, they start romanticizing these outlaws, the ones who challenge the system, even if they're breaking the law.
So these outlaws become like symbols. Yeah, symbols of resistance. They embody this desire for justice that the people in power won't or can't provide.
So the article's saying Trump's like that, despite all the legal issues and, let's face it, his behavior. Some voters see him as this rebel figure, like a modern-day Robin Hood almost.
Well, maybe not Robin Hood exactly, but definitely someone who's calling out what they see as hypocrisy, corruption in the establishment.
And the article digs into how.
It talks about this perceived shift in the left. They argue it's become dominated by elites. Wealthy elites focused on gestures more than addressing the everyday struggles of Americans.
Isn't that kind of a broad stroke, though? The left's pretty diverse to lump them all together like that. Seems a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
Yeah, I get that it's important to avoid, sweeping generalizations.
Right.
The article acknowledges there's diversity, but it argues this perception fuels a sense of alienation.
Alienation among who?
Among certain segments of the population.
Okay, so they feel like the people who used to champion the working class aren't fighting for them anymore.
Exactly, and then you have Trump.
With his whole drain the swamp thing.
Right, he's acknowledging their frustrations at least.
So even if they don't agree with everything he does, they like that he's shaking things up.
That seems to be a big part of his appeal.
This idea of disrupting the system.
Yeah, the article even compares him to the Corleone family from The Godfather.
Well, hold on a minute. Comparing a U.S. president to a fictional mafia family, that's a pretty big leap, isn't it?
It might seem that way, but think
No.
about it. The Corleones, they do all this criminal stuff, but they're often portrayed as having a code of honor, loyalty, justice, things like that.
And that resonates with people who think that the legitimate authorities are the corrupt ones.
Exactly.
So you're saying Trump, despite his flaws, he taps into that same feeling, this longing for a leader who's seen as more authentic even if they don't play by the rules.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
And the article says Trump's also good at that.
It says he exposes the hypocrisy of the elites.
Right, even his motives are kind of shady.
Exactly like that whole thing with Kamala Harris and her changing accent. They see that as fake and they reject it.
I can see that, but isn't it dangerous, though, to celebrate this whole outsider persona, especially with someone like Trump? With his track record, I mean...
That's definitely a valid concern.
Right.
The article does acknowledge that. They say Trump's approach is divisive, and his actions have been unethical sometimes, even illegal.
Right.
But they also stress that his success, it points to a deeper frustration in society with the status quo. People want change.
Even if it means turning to someone like Trump.
Yeah, they even quote this book, The Rebel Cell. It argues that a lot of what we call rebellious is just another way to sell an idea.
So the rebel is just another product, marketed to a disillusioned public.
It's a question we're thinking about.
So is Trump selling this image of the outsider?
Yeah.
This guy who will fight for the average person,
Yeah.
even if it means breaking the law.
Yeah. Is it genuine or is it just a really good strategy? The article suggests the line between the two can be pretty blurry.
Yeah, I bet.
And that makes you wonder, right? Like, can he actually govern this way? Can he be this social bandit and still run the country effectively?
That's a good point, does the article. Does it say anything about that?
Well, they actually warn against romanticizing this bandit leadership thing.
Okay.
They say it can shake things up at first.
Right. Disrupt the status quo.
Exactly. But then it often leads to instability and broken promises.
So not a great long-term strategy.
Yeah, they even have this line. The overwhelming majority of bandits meet a tragic end, and over time their romantic allure fades.
Kind of ominous.
It makes you think, is Trump headed for that same fate?
Can he break free from this outlaw image and actually governed effectively now that he's back?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right? Can he actually deliver this time?
The article says real leadership, it's more than just tearing down the system.
Okay, so what does it take then?
It takes commitment, to building something better, to finding solutions that actually benefit people.
So maybe the challenge for Trump is, can he evolve beyond this bandit thing? Can he be more inclusive, more collaborative?
Exactly. Can he hold on to that authenticity that his
Yeah.
supporters love,
Right.
but also show he's capable of actually leading the whole country?
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
It really is.
It also makes you think about the bigger picture. If people are so disillusioned with the system that they're willing to turn to someone like Trump, what does that say about our political system?
It definitely raises some red flags. It's about the level of distrust people have.
In the government, in institutions in general.
Exactly. Trump's victory, whether you like him or not, it's a sign that something needs to change.
That the people in power need to start listening.
To the everyday concerns of Americans.
And rebuild that trust.
Absolutely.
Now, the article didn't really get into specific policies, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are some areas where Trump could make a real difference? Assuming he moves beyond this bandit persona, of course.
That's a great question. Well, if we look past the rhetoric, there might be some common ground on things like infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yeah,
Yeah, both parties agree that needs work.
right. And it would have real benefits for people.
Creating jobs, boosting the economy.
Exactly. It's an area where practicality might win out.
Over ideology.
Right. Another possibility could be criminal justice reform.
Interesting. There's bipartisan support for that, too.
Yeah, addressing things like mass incarceration, sentencing disparities.
It's funny considering Trump's own legal situation. Imagine if he ended up championing those reforms.
That would be quite a twist, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would, but these are just a couple of ideas. Who knows what he'll actually focus on
And whether he can get Congress on board.
to make any of it happen.
Right. The political landscape is complicated, even with that bandit appeal. Governing effectively means building consensus.
And working within the system.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been really insightful. We've learned about the history of social bandits. We've looked at why Trump won despite everything. And we've even considered what his second term might hold. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing. The article touched on the role of the media and how there's this growing distrust of mainstream sources, with people turning to alternative outlets for their news.
Yeah, it's like a whole different world now with news. It used to be we all kind of got our news from the same places, but now it's like everyone's getting it from somewhere different.
It's true, the media has become so fragmented,
Right.
and people tend to seek out sources that reinforce what they already believe.
So they end up in these bubbles.
Exactly, echo chambers where you rarely hear.
Any opposing viewpoints.
It's almost like we're living in parallel universes,
Yeah.
each with its own version of reality.
It makes it really hard to have meaningful discussions.
Right, how can you find common ground when you're starting from completely different sets of facts?
It's a huge challenge. We need to figure out how to bridge these divides.
To break out of those echo chambers.
And engage with perspectives that challenge our own.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've learned so much about social bandits, why Trump won, and what his second term might look like. But before we go, I want to leave you with this. The article focused on this bandit persona. But can he keep that up? What happens when that appeal fades? When he has to deal with the actual realities of governing?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Right, what comes next?
Will we see a new kind of leadership emerge? One that can address the root causes of this disillusionment?
Or are we stuck in this cycle, always looking for a savior to rescue us from the establishment?
Maybe the question is more important than any answer.
Yeah, it makes us think critically about what kind of future we want.
And the role we each play in creating it.
It reminds us that we all have a responsibility here to engage in these conversations, to seek out different viewpoints.
And to hold our leaders accountable.
It's exactly. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of social bandits and modern politics. We hope you learned something new. And as always, keep exploring, keep challenging your assumptions, and keep diving deep